Georgie and I are going to give you a quick presentation today on our views on risk management 2022 and beyond, and whether it's really around managing risks at all. I also have to say I'm incredibly proud to follow on from Donna, a previous boss of mine, and her presentation really resonated. You'll find there's some common themes in what Georgie and I are about to present. So before we start, a little bit about Georgie and myself. So I am Hazel Arthur. I think we might have skipped on slightly ever so quickly. I'm Hazel Arthur, Head of Risk at Mott MacDonald. I've got 15 years cross-sector experience in designing, implementing and facilitating risk management change in projects, programmes and organisations. Georgie, could you give us a brief introduction to yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Georgie Stevenson. I'm a risk analyst at Mott MacDonald. Worked across a lot of sectors since I've been here, but primarily focusing on transport. And prior to that, I worked as a consultant in business continuity, and I studied risk management at GCU. And if there's anyone that's kind of based in Glasgow, I'm sure a lot of you did as well. But yeah, just back over to yourself, Hazel, to kick off the presentation.
Perfect. We're going to give you a very quick overview about Mott MacDonald, as we're often called the largest organisation that you don't know anything about. At 16,000 employees, we're a global engineering, management and development consultancy. Our network of experts look at problems from fresh angles and find opportunities in complexity. Our risk team, which I'm very fortunate to lead for our UK and Europe region, work across a number of projects in advisory, energy, defence, buildings and infrastructure and social infrastructure. So a nice variety, and you'll see how that ties into our call for action at the end of the presentation. But let's crack on with what we want to talk about. So one thing that has been commonplace in the last 15 plus years that I've been working in risk management is the unexpected. Global events have been unexpected. The COVID-19 pandemic and the national lockdowns were unexpected, and the current economic and political environment that we're in at the moment, again, was very unexpected and very uncertain. The unexpected are commonly considered emerging risks, are now less unexpected. And another way to think about that is that those risks that we previously considered as black swans are increasingly being discovered, too late to prevent them, and are quite often too late to do anything about them. So in the face of ever-changing and ever-growing uncertainty, how do we as risk professionals adapt to this? And do we really think that risk management is about managing risk at all? Tying in with the previous presentation, the experience looks to be mostly that we're having to work hard to push risk management or use governance as a way to justify it, and that's certainly what I've found. So one of the things that we've done is really look at what could we do differently, how do we change it? So let's begin by looking at the classic formula for risk. And we are very talking back to basics, not yet into the risk analytics. But if risk is likelihood times impact, likelihood and impact of what? And if there was one piece of your strategy that couldn't be achieved, would you be able to articulate that by likelihood and impact? If I asked any other discipline within the project management, programme management or organisational communities to articulate a problem that they had, they would not use 2 or 3 as a descriptor. If I asked how long it takes to make a cup of tea, for example, you would not reply with green. So why do we continue to force these parameters of a 5x5 matrix and a red, amber, green rating for risk management when they don't resonate with the people that we're working with? Secondly, as risk management is defined as the proactive process of identifying risks, threats and opportunities, assessing them, planning, deciding how to respond and implementing that response, how can we engage project managers, programme managers and organisations to do that when they have so many other things going on? If it's so busy, so complex and so uncertain, which items do you focus on? Risk leaders are increasingly challenged with the expectation of identifying and addressing those risks that few, if anyone, can see or understand or even articulate. And yet we can also miss the opportunities for doing something better. So it's key that we adapt static risk processes and evolve to today's challenges to ensure that we are being the best risk practitioners that we can. So before I go on to how we're doing that, we're going to do a really quick poll to gauge your views on how effective you are finding your risk reviews. And I think Mark's put that up.
I have, yeah. I'm not sure you can see it, but it's popped up already. For your benefit, I'll read them out. I slightly had to reframe your questions. So Hazel and Georgie ask, which of these statements reflect your experience? And they can, it says, oh, God. I kept slightly messing this up. Select one of them. Okay, should have been. You can select multiple. This is going to slightly skew the answers. I'm sorry about that, folks. But anyway, the answers are proactive decisions get made in a risk review. Do get made in risk review meetings. Proactive decisions don't get made in risk review meetings. We use risk registers as handrails for risk reviews, or we don't use risk registers as handrails. And lastly, we review risk registers, but need something more dynamic. Do apologize, with the one answer only, we're going to get a slightly sort of, yeah, we're not going to get quite the balance I'd hoped. Apologies for that. But actually, do you know what? This is interesting because there's two answers which are clearly the most popular. I'm going to close the poll now. Actually, a couple more. Oh, wow, there's a late flurry come in there. 56. Okay, slowing down now. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So two statements came out the most strongly supported. The first was the last one. We review risk registers, but need something more dynamic. That was the most popular. 40% of respondents picked that one. Second most popular, 32%. We do use risk registers as handrails for risk reviews. Hopefully that's sufficient for what you wanted, Hazel and Georgie.
Absolutely, it is, and it also ties in with some of the interaction we've had with project managers and project community around their experience of risk reviews and risk workshops. Georgie, could you go on to the next slide for me? So given the feedback that we've had there around something more dynamic is needed, and if we as risk professionals see that and the feedback from the project management community is the same, how do we evolve and change the way that risk is done? And for me, that's about shifting the view that risk management is about risks at all. It's driven by 4 pillars, and we'll go on to discuss these a little bit further, but it's about changing risk management from bolt on to being built in, and that requires a bit of a shift in how we approach it. It's about widening the reach and considering the full uncertainty landscape, and that includes changing our language around risk, maybe being a little bit less rigid on what we consider to be risk and what ones we discount. It's also about embedding risk analysis in decision making rather than making it a compliance tool. And finally, by being data driven and digitally supported. So let's go into those in a little more detail. The first one around being built in and not bolt on. For me, risk management isn't about managing risks. It's about changing how decisions are made, and so that we do that in a way in which risk is a consideration in any decision that is being made. It's about embedding it into the way that the organisations deliver, rather than being an activity that is driven by a risk team or an individual. And I'm perhaps being a little bit more extreme than Donna, but I think we're aligned that integrating risk into the agenda is far more effective. My statement that we should cancel risk reviews is perhaps a little provocative, but perhaps just reducing them is the way to go forward, or reshaping them. Certainly at Mott MacDonald, we don't actually use risk registers within our risk reviews. They are not a handrail. We use other items such as the project schedule, objectives, or progress as a way to look at what are the risks and what will stop us from delivering. I believe that if we ask the project management community today to do the same poll, whether or not they had ever attended, facilitated, observed a risk review that made a tangible difference to the success of a project, where targeted action was taken, decisions were made, and betterment was achieved, there would be resounding silence. Instead, risk reviews are often an administration of a register, which contains unconnected risk events, constrained by the formula of risk versus a challenge, for example, and which force us to consider probability and impact, or a RAG assessment, red, amber, green. It is perhaps more effective to spend 15 minutes on risk matters at every meeting than an hour once a quarter or a day once a month, where each risk can be discussed in parallel with the items that it impacts. I think that risk managers also need to establish risk analysis methodologies that limit reliance on management information and use internal data to avoid any underpinning bias, rather than just asking the room what their opinions are. We also must provide a communication channel that allows presentation of an alternative viewpoint than perhaps the management team. My final point is that modern day risk managers are very familiar with developing a risk management framework or procedure document, and they capture risk management roles, responsibilities, the drumbeat of meetings. But if we're honest, the only people reading those risk management framework documentations are risk professionals. Clearly something's not right. So when we hand risk information over to decision makers, we must be clear on what the expectations are for doing something with that information. And perhaps a risk management plan or risk strategy isn't the place to articulate that. Let's have risk responsibilities clear in our wider processes, in our agreements, and potentially even in our job requirements for all involved in a project delivery. I'm now going to hand over to Georgie, a colleague who brings, for me, such a fresh perspective on risk, and she's going to take you through the remaining 3 pillars.
Thank you, Hazel. So considering the full uncertainty landscape then, and how at Mott MacDonald we are using Safran risk software to enable this. So while most risk practitioners have come to agree that one of the better synonyms for risk is uncertainty, there is little agreement about how better to get ahead of this new reality of this increasing uncertainty and what is included within this. Risk managers need to speak the business language and avoid the risk management jargon to improve, engage, and change the focus to risk-based decision making rather than just risk gathering. Even the most basic terms like risk profile, risk mitigation, and risk assessment are unnecessary and they're completely avoidable as well. At Mott MacDonald, we are widening our risk discussions to lift up the language, using terms such as what are your challenges, what could derail you, what don't we know yet, and what is not currently within our control. And then off the back of that, asking things such as what does that look like for the project and how does that play out? And by considering the full uncertainty landscape of risks, issues, assumptions, dependencies and constraints, we get the full picture. And by considering that full landscape, our predictive risk analysis models capture not only an element of the challenges, but the projects face, but they actually capture the full scenario. So embedding risk analysis into decision making then. So the outcome of risk analysis helps to determine the risk-adjusted probability of achieving strategic objectives and the key risks that may negatively or positively affect the achievement of those objectives. And most assumptions are associated with some form of uncertainty and hence require risk analysis. And risk analysis helps to put unrealistic management assumptions under the spotlight. So moving far away from rules of thumb and application of 10% contingency, we've adopted Safran Risk within our team as a digital tool for achieving this. And this allows us to consider the full range of variables in project and programme delivery and set that against the project schedule or the cost model with options to blend the view between pre and post mitigation. So just building a bit on that, so using Safran Risk. So by using Safran Risk Analysis, the Mott MacDonald Risk team are able to enhance risk-based decision making for our project teams and our clients by using the software's complete functionality. and look at the full uncertainty landscape and model in more impactful ways. It allows us to model risks and uncertainties, apply duration uncertainties to activities, develop and import calendars, and apply negative and positive correlations as well. And this really helps to ensure we get the most realistic output based on the information we have available. The software provides us with information, informative output, to share in reporting and with our project teams. We can share things such as our typical distribution graphs that outline the percentile confidence values. We can present tornado diagrams that outline the factors that are driving the finish date, both of the risk side of things and from the activity side of things as well. And we can also show comparisons. We can say we run a model with pre-mitigation and then we run it again with the post-mitigation risk. We can send that to comparison and really show our project teams how much time they can save if they are successfully implementing their mitigations. It's also really easy to model different scenarios. For example, if we run a scenario and we see there's a couple of really key risks, it's easy to model those out and see what the difference would be if we really honed in on them and mitigated them fully. And as well, we show things such as removing contractor risk. And all of these functions really allow for better models and better decision making and visuals to present to our project teams. So data driven and updated then. So using Safran Risk Manager, we at Mott MacDonald are moving from Excel-based risk registers to a live database that allows us to build up over time risk trends against project objectives and industries. As well as using a digital platform like Safran for risk management, we're enhancing our services to clients by linking in with other disciplines such as planning and cost through a digital PMO platform. And that considers not just risks, but the full uncertainty landscape and links to risk analysis. And this is key to reviewing previous models and backtesting the predictive modelling. How often do we go back to risk analysis models that we run 6 months ago or that we run a year ago and test how those predictions align with reality and then refine and update that for the next time? We very, very rarely do. So having our risk analysis information held, reviewed, interrogated and refined is key. And without a backtest and an update process, the risk analysis models are just another opinion. At Mott MacDonald, we're using software and systems to develop an end-to-end integrated risk management process to ensure we best support our projects and our clients. So using Safran Risk Manager. The use of Safran Risk Manager allows for a more innovative and interactive way to hold risk when compared to our typical Excel register. It's a lot more sleek and it's user-friendly, and it has required fields that ensure our key risk information isn't missed and our data quality is consistent. Using Safran Risk Manager also means that risk data is more accessible to the whole project team, so that it's not just the risk manager's responsibility to review and update this risk information. It allows for collaboration and it gives a degree of responsibility to others in the project team, and it ensures that risk isn't simply that bolt-on activity that Hazel spoke about, and it's at the forefront of people's minds. It also allows us to look at trending through risk breakdown structures. It allows us to look at common risks and how they're assessed and use past data to inform future projects. And this can be more difficult to do when there's a number of separate Excel documents and registers kept in different places. But using a tool like Safran Risk Manager allows us to monitor and assess this easily, making sure that we're always learning from previous projects and taking those learnings forward as well. So managing risks isn't really about managing risks at all. It's about embedding risk-based decision making into the heart of how we deliver. It's about considering that full uncertainty landscape and responding accordingly. It's about being data-driven, reviewing and adjusting our information, and being supported by digital developments to address bias. And lastly, it's using quantified and predictive risk analytics to inform decisions and strategy, financials, time, and our confidence in getting the best output that we can. So I believe we'll hand over to yourself, Mark. I've left some time for questions, so if you can just field them to myself and Hazel, and we'll work together to answer anything that comes up.
Hi there, I can. There was a question a few minutes ago, and I held back because I thought you'd probably answer it, but I'll say it anyway. It was a question about risk registers. Sort of, if you don't use risk registers, how do you record the risks identified at schedule and other reviews, as well as the associated response actions? I mean, I think I know what you're going to say, but I'll let you answer that. You do still using risk register, right?
We absolutely do, yeah, I feel that. So we absolutely still use risk registers, and actually we use them in Safran Risk Manager for our projects, which are more digital. For some of them we are still in that Excel space, but we just don't use them as a handrail in risk reviews. And I think for me, that's when you have a risk workshop or a risk review, if it's that monthly cycle, it's very low energy when everyone is sat reading a risk register, working their way line by line, and really just administrating a lot of data. It's much more effective, I believe, for our risk professionals to have that risk register, in their back pocket or on Safran Risk Manager, and really use that forum as a way to have a conversation about risk, have a conversation about what are your next milestones, what will stop you from achieving that, what are your objectives, and how do we stop, things getting in the way of those, and then take all that stuff offline and update the risk register separately, rather than having a project team work their way line through line around whether or not a date has moved or a probability has increased. So we do use them, we just don't use them in that forum.
Okay, thank you. There is another question, and it's quite long, so just give me some breathing space to try and kind of get this across. It's about a traditional versus a newer philosophy of managing risk. So here it is. The question asks, you've defined the risk as the likelihood times the impact, but there's a newer approach that kind of defines risk as event uncertainties and strength of knowledge. Were these aspects, specifically strength of knowledge, where are these aspects, especially strength of knowledge, addressed?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think in the same mindset as yourself, where that traditional approach, although we said the traditional approach is likelihood by impact, and certainly going back to all of the sort of studies that I did back before I used risk and anger, was very much around risk and likelihood, and my opinion is that that's no longer effective. So I think the question's absolutely spot on around that newer approach, and what we're trying to do is capture, like you say, uncertainty, not just events, but also assumptions, where we're dependent on someone else. And I think that strength of knowledge is a really interesting aspect of it. We particularly see that play out when we're looking at assumptions and whether or not there's a strength of knowledge that underpins some of those assumptions, or whether or not actually we're just having to make a bit of a wild guess because we just don't know. And I think the key point really is, it's not really whether or not a risk has a likelihood and impact, or whether a risk is a risk event or an issue, or whether it fits within a comfy parameter that risk professionals are comfortable with. It's really about having that conversation with our clients, our projects, our organisations around what could cause you to change from your plan, and then what do we do about it. And I think that hopefully encompasses a little bit around that uncertainty and strength of knowledge place.
Okay, perfect. All right. I'm just looking for, I think we've got time for one more question. Oh, here we go. Should we use a simplified schedule or the real detailed schedule for a cost schedule risk analysis?
This is such a controversial question, Mark.
It's a political one, isn't it?
It really is a good one. So my experience is that project teams will often say, oh, well, now that you've got that new software tool, you can use a detailed schedule because the software might not have been able to handle it. And it's not really for me whether or not the software can handle the detailed schedule or not. There's a couple of things in there. One is the actual, just the mathematics of going through a detailed schedule, and particularly if you're using a very triangular distribution, and how that then centres in. And that bit loses the audience when we talk to project teams about it. I think as soon as you mention central limitation and distributions, they switch off. The reality is, if you're using a very detailed schedule, the traction that you get in a workshop with a project team or organisation around how uncertain they are around areas of that schedule, where risks play out, whether the logic is even correct at that level of detail, they're completely lost, and you've sort of missed the point. And we move from being we say you can't pick a specific date 5 years in advance and say that that's a certain date. What you can pick a very specific date with a probability around it 5 years in advance and lots of detail. We kind of missed the point that what we're trying to gather there is a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of unknown, so let's just make it in bigger handfuls and refine it as we progress. So I would always say a high level plan and a bigger approach until you know enough to have greater detail.
Okay.
It's very controversial. So.
It is. Okay. I'm going to wrap it up. We've got a minute to go, and I just want to give you 30 seconds. There were two call to actions I know you wanted to talk about. I'll let you. The first one about your growth plans at Mott. I'll let you make that one yourself now, and then I'm happy to kind of mention the other one, which is on the handout, which I'm quite excited about. But why don't you mention both? Actually, that's your your ideas.
Perfect. So at MacDonald, we are a very growing team. I'm really proud to be the head of a group of, I think we're around 20 to 25 at the moment, based predominantly in the UK, sitting within our specialist advisory portfolio, and we have more work than we can cope with. So we have a significant recruitment drive. I think we've brought on 4 or 5 in the last few months. The work is not stopping. So if you are interested in exploring further the opportunities that we have in the team, regardless of your sort of breadth of experience, then please do get in touch. And my direct email address, I believe, is in the handout.
Yes.
And the second call to action is just we're keen to discuss this further with other risk professionals, and I know it ties in nicely, sort of resonated well with Donna's presentation. You can see that she was previously a boss of mine. Will later on as well. Also, as you mentioned, Mark, we work together, so I'm sure there's lots of risk professionals out there with the same viewpoints. But we're keen to discuss it further, just to sort of work together to do something about how we change it. So there's a roundtable discussion that we will look to host in the coming months, and if people are interested in joining that, then I think I've volunteered Georgie's email address for that one.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you for volunteer. First of all, I'm very happy that you and other people are keen to see the value of risk managers and are keen to recruit one. The thing I'm very pleased at is, obviously it's no secret, but it's pushing up the salaries of our lovely risk professionals, which I'm quite pleased about, because I think we all do a cracking job, and we all deserve a bit more money. So that's a byproduct. But I know you've got a headache to find all these great people, because there's not enough of them. But good luck with that, and thank you so much for your roundtable idea. I fully support it. I think collaboration is absolutely key to advancing the effectiveness of the project controls community. So well done for that. I'm going to say goodbye now. Thank you very much, Georgie and Hazel. Appreciate that.